The Fall of the Roman Empire by Martine, Ethan, Kate, and Kevin. The Roman Empire was a very prosperous empire, but like all other empires, it eventually fell. But when did it fall? Well, many people have different theories. While one would say that the Roman Empire fell in 324 CE, others believe it was 455 CE. In reality, nobody knows, and there really is no definitive answer. The falling of an empire is a slow, gradual process, so deciding when the empire fell depends on where you draw the line. When it comes to why the empire fell, people had different theories too. While some people would say that it was because of military problems, another would say that it was because of economic problems. In truth, it boils down to a combination of economic, military, and administrative problems that fed into each other and led to the empire's demise. The first branch of problems were economic. These problems began in 235 CE during Marcus Aurelius's reign, when Rome began to collapse. These problems persisted and led to the beginning of what is now referred to as the Third Century Crisis. Partially due to Rome's military issues, very few provinces were added to the empire during this time, and thus not adding to Rome's economy. To make matters worse, during this era there was a growing interest in material luxuries that did not come from Rome. This resulted in much of Rome's wealth being traded away for gold, silver, and silk. Furthermore, during a war against the Parthian Empire, a plague broke out and an estimated 10% of Rome died. Due to Rome relying heavily on manual labor rather than modern-day machines, a 10% population loss meant a 10% loss in labor that the economy relied on. As the economy became weaker, the government raised taxes and debased coinage. This caused inflation, so in order to fulfill people's needs, salaries had to be raised accordingly. Of course, soldiers demanded higher pay, and the government gave them this willingly, because the empire relied heavily on these soldiers. As a result of paying soldiers, the government became short of money. They needed to keep raising taxes and debasing coinage. This resulted in an ongoing cycle.
Following the Third Century Crisis, Diocletian, a Roman emperor, made reforms to try to get Rome out of their weak financial state. Diocletian decided to split the Roman Empire into two halves, the East and the West. Each half had two rulers, making Rome a tetrarchy. Diocletian also expanded the army and filled it with Germanic tribesmen.
Yet another branch of problems that the Romans faced were administrative issues. You may recall that during the Third Century Crisis there was an endless economic cycle involving inflation and therefore relatively low pay for soldiers. When a soldier was asked for a pay raise, and wasn't satisfied with it, or lack thereof, when given an opportunity to acquire a higher pay, they would go with it.
During this time, many generals were quite keen on taking over the government, and with their soldiers unhappy with their pay, many of them pounced. Many armies abandoned the borders with their generals and took over the government, or at least attempted to. This became such a huge problem that at one point, 18 different people claimed to be the emperor of Rome. When it came to the Germanic tribes, not only did they fight the Romans, but oftentimes they made their way into the empire after being included in the army. The Germanic tribesmen really wanted to be included in society, and they did so well. After being literally in Rome's society, they demanded rights that were being denied to them. If they didn't get what they wanted, they would revolt and cause problems that Rome really didn't need at that time. Consequently, over time, the ex-Germanic tribesmen gained rights in society.
The next branch of problems the Romans faced were military problems. Leading up to the 4th century, the Roman military became less trained and less effective. Attacks on Rome by Germanic tribesmen kept Rome occupied, inhibiting the army's progression and wearing the military down. Lenient treaties allowed the Goths and other Germanic tribesmen to settle in the western half of the empire and carve out their own settlements. These settlements, as well as the groups of Germanic tribesmen inducted into the Roman army, were often largely independent from the rest of Rome. These soldiers were called foederati, and eventually, foederati were admitted in smaller numbers as well as in large groups. Increasingly, the tribesmen had little unity between them and were fairly loyal to Rome, but this caused a problem. As more and more Germanic tribesmen joined the Roman army, the less properly they were assimilated. Instead of being trained and led by their own individual leaders, the tribesmen were trained by the Roman army. This led to the Germanic tribesmen not being trained well enough, and Roman battle tactics fell apart under the lack of orientation. Another contribution to the army's lack of training was that there was no record kept of soldiers, and as long as a soldier replaced himself with another man, he could leave the army whenever he liked. These replacements were often untrained and therefore ineffective. As the Roman army became less effective, The Roman men didn't want to join the army, and thus more Germanic tribesmen were needed. This created a cycle of incompetence, and with continued attacks on Rome from the tribesmen, the Roman army became weaker and weaker. Eventually, the Roman army ceased to exist.
The frequently asked question in Roman history is, how come the Western Roman Empire fell first? There are many answers to a seemingly simple question. One of the main reasons for the Western Roman Empire disintegrated was because of the constant bombardment of Germanic tribes at the frontiers. The land was also important because it blocked off a lot of places where the Eastern Empire could have been attacked, while the Western Roman Empire had a lot more open land and was more vulnerable. The internal weaknesses for both sides had still made the situation worse and weakened the Roman army and government if the East did get attacked by foreign tribes, but less so from the Western Roman Empire. For the Western Roman Empire, the economy fell apart because too many jobs were given to tribesmen, not citizens. When the tribesmen didn't find to integrate themselves in Eastern society, the empire made sure that there was only a small amount of tribesmen in the army. This allowed for more Romans to have jobs, strengthening the local economy. These also had a head start since they had pre-civilized land from when the Greek Empire was around. As you can see, the Roman Empire fell for many different reasons. Although we can't quite tell you when it exactly happened, the accumulation of all of its administrative, economic, and military problems led to its demise. Despite Rome's fall, the empire made a lasting impact on society and was prosperous for a very long time. With all beginnings, there is always an end.